you very much and for the invitation, and maybe just to start from that, I have since moved on in terms of responsibilities. I'm no longer the group lead for inspections, but I've moved up and I'm actually overall unit head for pre-qualification. That is covering both vaccines, medicines, diagnostics, and vector control, and served by the inspection team. So inspection team is one of the teams under my responsibility. But having said, I'm glad to be here and to talk to you about vaccines, vaccine evaluation and new developments in innovations. And the way I will talk about it is more from the angle, not from the R&D angle production part, but from the evaluation part and what WHO has been doing in the evaluation of these new vaccines, and more so importantly, facilitating their authorization and access in the member states, the 194 member states. Next slide, please. So just to put it into context, is WHO's evaluation of this is necessitated by two broad things. One is that under the WHO regulatory system strengthening approach, we classify regulatory systems into 4 maturity levels, 1 to 4, 1 being the weakest and the 4 being the strongest and the most efficient and consistent. And under that, we say that maturity level 3 is the minimum level to assure each country of the quality and safety and efficacy of the health products that are saturating in their market. And when we put this into context, out of 194 countries, we find that only 53 or equivalent to 27% have a regulatory system that is above maturity level 3 and above. And this is, by the way, only referring to medicines. And when we apply this to vaccines and diagnostics and other health products, the percentage is even much smaller. What that means that over 75 or 73% of the countries have a regulatory system that may not fully assure their citizens of quality assured products. And therefore, WHO put in place incentives or programs or initiatives to address that. And this is in 2 respects. One, strengthening the regulatory system of the countries, and we have a team that is involved in benchmarking the regulatory systems of countries, but also supporting them through their institutional development plan to develop to maturity level 3. But the second one, because this is a long-term aspect, a long-term project, it takes time to develop health systems and regulatory systems. WHO also put in place a pre-qualification process, especially to support member states primarily, but also to support international procurement for international funded initiatives and programs in countries to make sure that they have access to, they can identify and use quality assured products in their programs as they combat the various diseases and health problems in the various countries. So that is the background under which this is carried out. Of course, needless to say that with globalization, where the world has become a global village, it's not enough just to regulate your own country, but the products now go through international commerce, international trade, and hence a product that is produced in one country, if it's not well regulated, may easily end up in another country. And even if you have a good regulatory system, it's important to have an international approach and collaboration to ensure that all products that are saturating international commerce are all quality assured medicines. All products. Next slide, please. Now, homing into the reality and the current pandemic, as you know, this is a global pandemic that is affecting the entire world. It's important to understand that, if you look at the vaccination program, you see that a number of countries, particularly Africa and parts of Asia, have not fully vaccinated their population, and that means that these are not protected. But this is not a risk, not only a risk to those countries, but because, as we have seen recently, the longer people take to get vaccinated, the more it gives room for development of various variants. And these variants sometimes come with more virulence, with more transmissibility, and with more severity of disease. And which variants also are able to even to spread to even countries that have highly vaccinated their population. And then because they are more virulent and more transmissible, we have risks of breakthrough infections, and we see rising cases of new infections happening across the world. So it is in everybody's interest that we work together to make sure that these new innovations are evaluated and are available for everybody in order to protect everybody. Nobody will be safe until everybody is safe. Next slide. Again, just to show, and I will not dwell very much on this, to show really that if you look at this and you see the disparities in access to vaccines and vaccination, and I would like to say that, as I said in my last slide, that nobody will be safe until everybody is safe. So even those highly vaccinated countries should not relax, because indeed, as we've seen, that when new variants come, they even affect those countries that are vaccinated. So the strategy should be all of us, we should work together to make sure everybody is vaccinated. Next slide. Now, coming to WHO approach to evaluation and how it is similar, but also how it is different from other evaluations, even by a stringent regulatory authority. When an evaluation is taking place at the national level, it's looking at the context of their country and the situation in their country. And so the requirements are tailored to the needs of that specific country. But when you have a pandemic like this that is global, maybe national requirements may not be able to look at the global context. And therefore, evaluation against global requirements would be an appropriate approach to manage a global pandemic like the one we are managing now. So WHO guidelines go through international consultation, not only from one country, but worldwide, and we have input, and we make sure that then those inputs reflect the global situation, especially those for low and medium income countries where the resource settings are limited and may have challenges implementing, especially new technologies, so that we make sure that the new technologies are appropriate, can be used appropriately, used in these countries. So that's why evaluation under WHO provides a good route for access, especially in global pandemics like the one we are facing now. Next slide, please. Always, regulators and evaluators have a challenge. On one side, they would like to promote health and make sure that everybody has access to quality assured products and can manage the conditions that affect their health. On the other hand, they must protect the public, also the population, against any harm that could come across, especially using new products. And as we start using innovative products that have not been used, it's important that this balance is very, very much adhered to, and scientifically approached with the science to make sure that no compromise are made. If you only look at access and you don't focus on protection, you may cause harm, especially for products like vaccines that go through massive administration to almost to the entire population. On the other hand, if you overemphasize control and you are so conservative, then you may, as we may see, you may be a hindrance to access and then give room for development, the spread of the pandemic and development of variants as we are seeing that. So it's a delicate balance and it requires robustness and science to be able to strike the right balance. Next slide, please. So, one of the tools that WHO has put in place is what we call the emergency use of listing authorization. And the history is that this one was a mechanism that was developed mainly in 2014-16 during the Ebola outbreak. And it is a risk-based approach to expedite availability of health products needed in public health emergency situations. It is intended to assist interested procurement agencies and member states on the suitability of use of specific health products based on minimum available set of data for quality, safety, and performance. And by nature, because these products are still under development and more information, its approval is time limited. Having said that, there is a robust risk benefit assessment and no corners are cut, but also looking at the risk of the pandemic that we face, then that right balance is struck to make sure that access of these products is facilitated. Next slide. So looking at a high level, and I will keep it at a high level to look at the technologies that we have, the new technologies that we have. Some are established technologies, but others are new technologies. We have, we can largely group the vaccines that we are dealing with at the moment into 4 broad categories. But even doing, as you see, that we have some subsets of those categories. We have those virus vaccines. And among those, we have those vaccines that use a weakened virus or one that is harmless, that does not cause disease, but is used as a carrier. But also we have those that are the actual virus that has been inactivated. And we have various types of these already on the market, and including those that are listed by pre-qualification and WHO under emergency use listing. Then we have viral vector vaccines, where we have those that are replicating viral vectors. That means they can replicate, but there are also those that are non-replicating viral vectors. And again, we have a number of vaccines that are on the market, including those that are under evaluation by WHO that use this level of technology. Then we have nucleic acid vaccines. Those could be DNA vaccines, but what is common and now that has been authorized are mainly RNA vaccines, and where we have already authorized vaccines that use this technology. And another technology and platform that is used in the manufacture of COVID vaccines, as we speak, is protein-based vaccines. And these mainly use protein subunits, but also may have virus-like particles that are used. So each of these comes with its own peculiarity. Each platform comes with its characteristics in terms of safety profile, in terms of ease of manufacture, ease of control, but also sometimes even we see differences in ability to induce, for example, immunity and duration of that immunity. But having said that, again, we see that each of these technologies could be used to produce very, very effective vaccines that are currently being used. Next slide, please. So when we look at this, we look at what challenges are there in evaluating these new technologies and what solutions they have. One of the things that I've already referred to is regulatory requirements. We have one of the problems developers face is different requirements by different countries. And in the global market like that we have now, where you have to market your products across, if you have to meet the different requirements, sometimes this may require conducting extra trials that become very expensive. That means adding cost to the product, but also may delay access. And what WHO has done that in this area, first of all, is to develop criteria for evaluation, and this has been put in the public domain. But even before that, developing target product profiles to understand that what are we looking for in a new vaccine that is being developed, so that it increases chances of meeting the need that is there. And we put, as I said, we put in place the emergency use authorizations requirements that are also on the website, and also through our committees like the expert committee on bioeco standardization, a number of guidelines have been produced to bring harmony and international requirements that could be used and adopted and adapted by countries to facilitate evaluation of these new events. And related to that is to alignment of these regulatory requirements. So again, following from the same point, if again each country comes up with different requirements, it becomes a big regulatory burden for developers. And so we have been facilitating regulatory alignment under the Act A, that is the Access to COVID Tools Accelerator, the vaccine pillar called COVAX. We have what we call a regulatory advisory group, which is chaired by WHO, but has many of the regulators across the world. And I'm glad to mention here that now that I'm talking about talking to the Indian audience, the DCGI of India is represented on this regulatory advisory group. And this meets regularly to harmonize requirements across the world to make sure that the different regulatory requirements do not become a burden. We also participating in the discussion and under the International Coalition of Medicines Regulatory Agencies that brings together a number of over 30 leading regulators across the world that also make sure that we harmonize. And we are facilitating also various regulatory networks like in the ASEAN, where India belongs, but also in other regions of the African continent and in other South America and in the Middle East. A number of regulatory networks at the regional that we are facilitating to bring regulatory alignment and facilitate access rather than duplication of requirements that increase cost and delay access to this. And of course, we have what we call the vaccine cluster that also brings together the leading regulators across the world that actually was instrumental in, if you look at the WHO requirements for evaluation of vaccines, and you look at those of USFDA and those of EMA, you find that they are properly aligned, and thanks to the vaccine cluster that facilitated that. So having said that is to make sure that we put in place the resources to have a global assessment, and then first of all to make sure that there is a clear prioritization mechanism and a transparent eligibility criteria, and then establishment of evaluation group. In this period, we contacted all the 6 WHO regions, and each region was requested to nominate a number of experts in the area of toxicology or non-clinical, clinical, then CMC or quality, and then also risk management plan. And these have participated in the evaluation, again bringing expertise and consideration from regions from all over the world. So starting with the international requirements, but also now bringing assessors from the different regions of the world to make sure that we assess together these innovative tools and make sure that the inputs and consideration of the different regions are put into consideration during the assessment, so that at the end, when we list a vaccine, then this is suitable for use across the world. And that, of course, we also, in addition to this assessment group, we have an independent technical advisory group that does the final risk-based analysis, and the membership, again, of the technical advisory group is on the website. And I'm glad also to say we have eminent scientists and experts from India who also participate in the technical advisory group. It does not stop here, because listing products at the on the WHO website is not the end. They must be authorized in the individual countries where they are needed and administered. And for that, we put in place various mechanisms to ensure facilitated access and authorization. I am glad to say that, although not a scientific innovation, but there was another innovation during this pandemic. Because, as you can imagine, for even the biggest multinationals who had vaccines, none of them was in position to submit dossiers simultaneously to 194 member states and support the responses from those countries in a timely manner for those countries to authorize the vaccine and use it. And this was likely to become a rate-limiting step. And WHO, we engaged these manufacturers and agreed that, one, in addition to giving us consent to share with member states who signed confidentiality agreements our assessment and inspection reports, but they also allowed us with the confidentiality agreement to share dossiers with those countries that were not able to where the applicants were not able to submit dossiers in a timely manner, so that access to dossiers and assessment report does not become a rate-limiting step for access of this vaccine. And I'm glad to say that this has happened very well. As the last count, we have shared more than 500 reports with over 100 countries since the beginning of the year. And so far, no manufacturer or no country has revealed that their information has been abused, but this has resulted over 500 authorization and access to these vaccines. So another innovation, not in a scientific but regulatory initiative to ensure access to these new innovations under a pandemic situation like ours. Next slide, please. So I have touched many of these things already as I talked. The first thing was to make sure that we align the criteria through the target product profile, the guidelines developed by the expert committee, and then other regulatory guidelines. Then to put in place submission requirements that included the EUL guidelines and the PQ guidelines. And including, we put in place a question and answer to answer key questions that we're getting from developers and the procurement agents and national regulatory agents to answer the key questions so that then this can help them in making their decisions. Then, of course, we invited applicants to submit, and we put guidelines for how to submit and the conditions. And then more so, we put in place guidelines for labeling and packaging. Imagine if you are labeling a product, starting from the language and content that the product that needs to go globally. It's important that we harmonize our requirements. Otherwise, even different labels in themselves can cause an indirect barrier to access or a complexity to access. Then the assessment process I talked about, we brought candidates from all over the world, and also to do not only inspection, but also came up with the guidelines on lot release and the reliance on lot release, and also post-listing commitments and interaction with it. This was facilitated with interactions and agreements with different national regulatory agencies and of course, the global assessment that we've talked about. And this finally resulted in the sharing information and facilitating country access. Next slide, please. If you can click like 4 times. Again, this is yes. So this is again a semantic reflection of how the process works, starting with the dossier that is submitted an inspection site and the lot release that either through the stringent regulatory authority or assessment led by WHO, then that through reliance mechanism that goes to the country for reliance and including post-approval facilitation. And what is important is a transparent sharing of reports, and also including the pipeline is updated weekly on the website to know what is in the on the pipeline and when is it expected to be on. So this has facilitated players to understand, predict the timelines and the process, but also for those who rely on these authorizations to know when certain products are likely to be available. Slide. So just to say again, this is the eligibility criteria, and I will not dwell very much on that. But for EUL, it's important that this is open to, like in this case, for an outbreak or epidemic or pandemic, where there's no licensed products in place to address that. And again, of course, we must still maintain compliance with the GMP, and there must be a functional quality management system. And then, because the products are under development, there must be a commitment to continue the development and come to full pre-qualification and full licensure. Next slide. Now, this is a quick summary of products that are listed there, that are authorized around the world, but I'm also focusing, especially focusing you on those that are authorized by WHO, being Pfizer, BioNTech, AstraZeneca, Janssen, Moderna, of course, Covishield, and then we also have Sinopharm and Beijing Institute, and then Sinovac. And there, of course, there are many more in the pipeline, and that shows the dates when they were authorized, when the policy recommendations were made, and of course the various updates. Next slide, please. In summary, we have 25 COVID vaccines in the pipeline, and 12 of them have been tested, and 7 vaccines are ongoing and that are expected, and 6 vaccines are being planned for submission. Next slide. Again, just looking at, and I will not go through this, you get this. For each of the authorized vaccines, you will see which platform, the platforms I referred to that are being used, whether it's mRNA, whether it is vector vaccines, or whether inactivated, whether it's protein particles, all this is highlighted. It shows, and the efficacy that was reported in the dossiers, and of course, we also look at vaccine effectiveness, especially against variants of concern. And then we also have the storage requirements for each of those vaccines, the dosage regimens, the minimum age so far, and then any additional supplement. You'll get this, but this again is information that's available on the website, and it's important to understand the uniqueness of the various platforms. Also, just to say that when we set the requirements at the beginning, before any vaccine was licensed, we all agreed with all the major agencies that the minimum efficacy that we would accept best would be 50% efficacy with a 95% confidence interval, lower bound confidence interval of 30%. But we were presently surprised, and this was based on our experience on the various vaccines that was used on respiratory-related diseases and seasonal influenza, but we were presently surprised that all the vaccines that came in place without any exception were way above the 50%. So highly efficacious, and that's why I would. In fact, I get surprised when I hear a lot of vaccine hesitance that the vaccines may not be effective. Because most of the vaccines if all the vaccines that we have received here are much more effective than those that we have used, for example, in seasonal flu and in previous pandemics. So people should trust indeed these vaccines. Next slide. Talking about, it's not about theory, talking about the innovative facilitation of that national authorization. For example, just to give an example here, because of that innovative approach of one global assessment led by WHO, followed by ability to share not only the dossiers, but also the reports and both inspection and assessment report, that has quickly facilitated authorization of these products in the countries. This is an example of AstraZeneca and including SII vaccine. Within 15 days of issuing the emergency use listing by WHO, 101 countries who received access to the reports authorized this vaccine. This is really remarkable, and that means innovation, not only in the development of products, but in the regulatory approaches and access can really facilitate access to these products in the pandemic like this one. Next slide, please. So there were a number of flexibilities that were put into place, also, especially when most of us, including the manufacturers, were facing restrictions in movement, and also so factory workers could not get to work, and also inspectors could not get to these sites for inspection. A number of things were put in place. For example, remote real-time inspections of various studies, both for bioequivalence, vaccine size, quality control labs, and finished products manufactured. This helped continuity of access and oversight of these sites. Of course, we also, where there was reliable information, we also conducted desk reviews based on other people's inspections and reliance on work done by other mature national regulatory agencies. We also collaborated with other agencies to conduct joint inspections instead of multiple inspections. A number of joint inspections were conducted, thus reduced single inspection being a utility to many jurisdictions. And of course, we know that, for example, the public inspection reports that normally have 3 years validity, we extended them to 4 years in order not to disrupt access and supply. And of course, we continue the evaluation of the quality management system to support emergency use list. Next slide, please. So actually, this is the last slide. In short, there has been rapid development of technologies during this pandemic. We have been innovative and collaborative in the requirements and evaluation of these vaccines, but also in using the reliance mechanism. And thanks to the collaboration across the board, right from the manufacturers to regulators and member states that have made that happen, make sure that these new technologies continue to be safe, but also available to the population of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Deus. It's nice to see you on IPA platform today. Up till now, we were seeing on the WHO JSS platform, so it's nice to see you on the IPA platform. There are no questions. I just want to thank you and WHO for doing the wonderful work during the pandemic and to face such situation in very bravely. And with the vaccines now, so many are coming. And I think India has also achieved the 1 billion mark today. So that's an achievement. And thank you. Just to say thank you, I am coming. No questions. Thank you. Thank you once again.